Hey everyone. I'm glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it, where you are? I always wonder, who's out there in the quiet half asleep, drifting somewhere between night and history? Because tonight, I want to take you somewhere far away, to a world of long nights and colder air. To the far north, more than 1,000 years ago, when the sea still carried wooden ships and the wind spoke through pine forests. They say the Vikings, those rough, sea-worn men and women of legend, slept better than anyone in history. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? These were warriors and sailors, raiders and farmers. Yet when darkness fell over their world, something happened. The noise of the day vanished, and all that remained was the hush of snow, the flicker of firelight, and the deep rhythmic breathing of people who knew peace, real peace, for a few hours every night. Let me tell you a story. His name was Eirik, and he lived by a fjord in western Norway, in the shadow of a mountain that caught the last light of the sun. His house was made of timber, thick and warm, built by the hands of his father and his father's father before him. It stood at the edge of the fields, facing the cold water, where sometimes whales passed so close he could hear their breath. By the time the day's last work was done, the light had already faded. The sheep were in their pens. The sea was a dark mirror. In the distance, smoke rose from other farms, thin and blue, curling toward the sky. The night in the north came fast, but it wasn't frightening. It was like a great, soft blanket laid over the land. Inside the longhouse, the air was thick with the smell of pine resin, wool, and firewood. The hearth in the center burned low, sending its glow across carved beams and hanging shields. Eirik sat by the fire, his hands rough from the day's work, watching the embers crumble into ash. Around him were his wife and children, wrapped in thick furs. A pot of stew still steamed gently. Their dog slept beside the door, twitching in dreams. The quiet was heavy, but not empty. You could hear small sounds, a soft sigh, the crackle of wood, the wind humming faintly through the roof's thatch. Even the old timbers seemed alive, creaking as if they too were breathing with the night. When they finally lay down to rest, it wasn't in private rooms or separate beds. The family slept together along one side of the hall, near the warmth of the hearth. Their heads rested on stuffed woolen sacks, and over them lay blankets of sheepskin, heavy and comforting. The children nestled between their parents, and even the animals slept close, the cat, a hen or two, sometimes a newborn lamb that needed warmth through the cold. Eirik's eyes closed easily. There were no clocks, no light from other houses, no hum of distant roads. Only the rhythm of the waves below and the faint whistle of wind across the fjord. The world outside was still, and so his thoughts grew still too. He dreamt, not in pictures, but in feelings. In the dreams of the north, the line between the living and the unseen was thin. Sometimes he felt the presence of his ancestors, sitting by the same hearth in years long past. Sometimes he heard the sea speaking, a deep voice, ancient and slow. They said in those days that the night belonged to the gods. That Odin's ravens flew in silence, watching over sleepers. That the goddess Night herself, rode her horse across the sky, her mane scattering stars. And as she passed, all living things grew quiet and still, wrapped in her dark cloak. Sleep, in their world, wasn't only rest. It was something sacred. A journey. A small death, followed by a small rebirth every morning. Eirik believed that the way a person slept told the truth about their soul. If you lay restless and cold, it meant something inside you was unsettled. But if your dreams came easily, if you drifted like a ship across calm waters, it meant your life was in balance. And so he slept. Deeply. Entirely. Sometimes the snow outside fell so heavily that it muffled every sound, even the sea. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. And in that silence, the people of the north found a peace no city could ever know. They didn't have the comfort we think we need today. No featherbeds, no walls of glass, no soft lights. But maybe comfort isn't what brings sleep. Maybe it's trust. Trust that the day's work was done, that the fire would last till morning, that tomorrow would bring another dawn. When you live in tune with the land, the mind obeys the rhythm of the earth. It rests when the earth rests. And in that perfect alignment, perhaps the Vikings found the secret we have lost. The art of sleeping not just with the body, but with the world itself. Outside, the stars burned clear and cold. The northern lights shimmered faintly on the horizon, pale green threads woven across the sky. Eirik stirred once, then fell back into slumber, the glow of the fire reflected in his half-closed eyes. And so, under the vast frozen heavens, he slept better than any king. The night passed slowly, in that quiet way it always did in the north, as though time itself had thickened, becoming heavy and still. When the first thin line of dawn touched the rim of the mountains, a faint blue light slipped through the smoke hole above the hearth. The longhouse breathed again, creaking as the frost on its beams began to melt. Inside, the air smelled of ashes and pine. Eirik stirred under his blanket, his mind surfacing from deep sleep. Around him, the others were still, the soft breathing of his wife, the faint rustle of children turning in their sleep, the dog stretching near the door. The warmth of the hearth had kept the chill at bay through the long hours of darkness. A Viking longhouse was more than a shelter, it was a living being, a heartbeat in the middle of the wilderness. Its long ribs of timber arched above like the hull of a ship turned upside down, as if reminding those inside that they were always voyagers, even when still. Smoke coiled upward, thin and slow, carrying the smell of oak and peat. There were no windows, only the soft glow of firelight and the filtered blue from the rising day. The air shimmered faintly with warmth near the hearth, and turned colder near the walls. Every beam, every post, bore the marks of years, carvings of snakes, knots, horses, gods. These were not decorations but prayers, whispered into the wood when it was first cut from the forest. It was said that the house listened, that if you spoke kindly within its walls, it would keep you safe from storms. And so, people spoke softly here. Voices never rose harshly at night. Eirik sat up, brushing wood dust from his tunic. He looked around at the place that held his whole world. His ancestors had built it. His children would live here after him. Every night, generation after generation, families had slept on the same wooden platforms, wrapped in wool and fur, facing the same glow of the central fire. The warmth was shared, the air shared, even dreams seemed shared, like one breath moving through many chests. Maybe that's why they slept so deeply. No one was alone. The sounds of sleep, soft snores, quiet breaths, the occasional murmur, were like the low hum of the earth itself. The night was communal, protective. No need to guard yourself, because someone was always there. In modern nights, we lie in separate rooms, behind walls, lit by pale electric stars. But here, in this old hall of timber and shadow, sleep came in waves that touched everyone equally. When one person shifted, the others felt it. When one sighed, the dog raised its head. When silence returned, it was the silence of a whole house resting together. Eirik remembered when his youngest daughter, Solveig, was born. During her first winter, she had cried every night until they brought her closer to the hearth. After that, she slept soundly. The warmth, the murmur of voices, the smell of smoke, it was what she knew even before she could walk. Children learned to sleep not in perfect quiet, but in the heartbeat of life around them. The fire, always in the center, never truly died. Even when the last log crumbled into red dust, someone, often Eirik's wife, would rise in the dark to stir the coals, feed them with a handful of dried moss and a sliver of birch. The glow returned, breathing warmth into the air again. To keep the fire alive was not a chore, but a vow. If the fire lived, the house lived. And perhaps that's what made their rest so deep. The knowledge that something sacred was watching, a warmth that never abandoned them. There were no candles ticking away the hours, no bells to wake them, no mechanical rhythm forcing their rest to fit the clock. The body knew when to sleep and when to rise. Outside, the roosters would crow when dawn truly broke. Until then, time simply floated. Eirik sometimes thought of the stories his grandfather told, about how the dead also slept in houses of earth. They were buried with the things they loved: a cup, a cloak, a piece of jewelry, a blade. In the afterlife, it was said, they lived again in a great hall under the ground, with a fire burning and friends around. Even death, to the Norse mind, was not cold or lonely. It was just another night in another longhouse. He liked that thought. The wind shifted outside. You could hear the faint groan of trees leaning under frost, the whisper of snow sliding from the roof. The fjord below lay frozen near the shore, the ice glinting with morning light. Beyond it, mountains rose pale and blue, their tops catching fire from the first rays of sun. Eirik's wife opened her eyes and smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes before words. She reached out to stir the pot left beside the hearth, now just warm enough to drink from. The smell of mead and herbs filled the room. The children began to wake, blinking against the dim light. But for a few moments more, everyone stayed quiet. The longhouse still held that feeling, the slow, suspended peace between night and day. The kind that made every sound seem distant, every thought gentle. He wondered sometimes if this stillness would last forever, if his descendants, centuries from now, would ever know a night so deep. Or would they lose it, chasing light and noise until even sleep had to be fought for? He didn't know, of course. But as he stretched, the firelight warming his hands, he felt sure of one thing. Here in this old hall of timber and smoke, sleep was a gift the earth itself gave freely. You didn't have to earn it, or chase it, only to let go and let the dark hold you. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the frost to mist. The dog barked once, shaking off the night. Soon there would be work, nets to mend, logs to split, animals to feed. But for now, in the last soft moments of morning, Eirik just sat in the glow, remembering the dream he had lost. Something about a ship, moving across silver water, silent as the sky. He couldn't tell where it was going, only that it felt peaceful, endless, slow, and sure. And that feeling stayed with him, long after the day began. When the day's work ended, the fjord grew quiet again. The sea, which had shimmered silver and blue under the sun, darkened to iron. Gulls drifted lower, their cries fading into the distance. The smell of salt and fish clung to everything, the nets, the oars, even the wool of Eirik's tunic. Evening was his favorite time, not for the warmth of the fire or the taste of mead, but for that sound, the steady, endless murmur of the sea brushing against the rocks. Some nights it was soft, like a mother's breath over a sleeping child. Other nights, when storms rolled through the narrow fjord, it roared with the voice of gods. But always it was there, patient and eternal. Eirik had grown up beside that sound. He could not sleep without it. When he was a boy, he had thought the sea was alive, a living creature whose slow breathing rocked the world. Now, as a man, he still believed it, though in a quieter way. That night, the moon rose pale and distant over the mountains. The tide was high, the water smooth. His small ship, moored near the shore, tugged gently against its ropes, as if dreaming of distant lands. Sometimes, when trade called him to sail, to the next fjord, or to the islands beyond, he slept on board. There was no roof then, no hearth to glow in the dark, only the stars and the rhythmic creak of wood. The ship's hull was narrow, curved like a cradle, and every rise and fall of the waves became part of his heartbeat. He would lie on his cloak, one arm under his head, and stare upward. The stars above the North Sea were different from those seen from the land. Sharper, colder, closer somehow. When the clouds cleared, he could almost believe the world ended there, at the edge of the black horizon. The others aboard, the rowers, the traders, sometimes his cousin Leif, would murmur quietly before sleep. They talked of wind and whales, of strange islands, of the scent of foreign spices that clung to the cargo. Their voices blended with the sea until all that remained was a kind of low humming, not speech anymore, but the sound of men becoming part of the ocean's rhythm. And then sleep would come. People often imagine the Vikings as restless, fierce, forever moving, but out here, beneath the sky, they were at peace. The waves rocked them like children, the stars watched in silence, and the cold air wrapped them in clarity. There was no noise of cities, no flicker of lamps, no pulse of urgency. Just time, drawn out and smooth as the tide. Eirik remembered one journey clearly. It had been early spring, when the ice still floated like glass across the fjord. The sea smelled of iron and snow. They had sailed for 2 days toward the islands where seals gathered, to trade for oil and hides. At night, they anchored near a rocky shore. The sky was full of green light, the aurora moving in slow waves above them. Everyone stopped talking, even the youngest men. They just lay back, listening. The sea lapped against the hull, gentle and cold, and the northern lights flickered like spirits whispering to each other. In moments like that, it was easy to believe the old stories, that the sea was not a thing of water, but of memory. That each wave carried whispers from other lands, other times. That if you listened long enough, you might hear the voices of your ancestors calling from beneath the deep. He had once asked an old sailor, gray and half-blind, whether the sea ever truly slept. The man had laughed and said, "It sleeps when you do." Eirik had thought about that for years. Maybe it meant that when a man's mind was calm, the world itself seemed calm too. And perhaps that was why they slept so well. Their nights were not cut away from their days. The sound of waves was not a distraction, it was continuity. It connected the waking and the dreaming world, a thread that never broke. Back home on still nights, he could hear the tide shifting far below, the faint suck and sigh of the current against the stones. It was the same sound his father had heard, and his father's father before him. Each generation fell asleep to the same song. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would wake and listen. Not from worry, he had nothing to fear, but from that strange pull the sea always had. He would rise quietly, step outside the longhouse, and feel the frost under his bare feet. The air smelled of smoke and salt. The fjord gleamed faintly under the moon. In the distance, he might hear the bark of a seal, or the low moan of wind through the pines. Otherwise, silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of tiny invisible movements, of life breathing softly in the dark. He'd stand there for a while, until the cold began to bite, and then go back inside. The warmth of the longhouse would swallow him. The fire's last glow would pulse against the beams like a heartbeat. And as he lay down again, the rhythm of the sea outside seemed to merge with the rhythm of his own blood. No wonder they slept deeply. The whole world seemed to rock them. The mountains guarded their dreams, the water sang them to rest, and the wind wrapped around them like a story told in whispers. Once, years later, when Eirik would travel to lands far away, places where the air smelled of foreign soil and the nights were filled with strange noises, he would remember that sound. The sound of the North Sea in his childhood, the quiet pull and release, like breath itself. He would close his eyes and listen for it, and somehow even there it would return to him. A phantom sea, carried in his bones. And that, he thought, was what home really was. Not walls or roofs, but a sound that never leaves you. That night, as he drifted toward sleep, the waves rolled softly against the rocks, whispering the same promise they had made since the world began. Rest and I will hold you. And Eirik did. Winter came quietly that year, as if the season had crept down from the mountains on padded feet. One morning, Eirik woke to find the world transformed. the fjord sealed by thin sheets of ice, the birch trees powdered white, the air so still that every breath hung suspended like smoke. The daylight was brief now, a fragile thing. The sun rose late and fell early, and between those short hours the world lingered in twilight. The hills, the roofs, the very air itself seemed blue with cold. And when night returned, as it always did, heavy and patient, it wrapped everything in silence. The longhouse became the center of the universe. Outside, the snow erased the paths, the fences, even the sound of the animals in their sheds. But inside, the fire burned brighter than ever. The heat from the hearth shimmered upward, painting the rafters gold and red. Shadows moved along the carved beams, like figures in an ancient dance. Eirik sat near the fire, sharpening his small knife. The metal gleamed faintly. His wife, Astrid, spun wool by the light of a tallow lamp, her hands steady and rhythmic. Their children whispered to each other under blankets. The smell of dried fish, smoke, and pine needles filled the hall, the scent of survival. Winter was a long pause between lives. In those months, the Vikings slowed down. The sea froze, the fields slept. They repaired tools, mended nets, shaped wood. They told stories, sang songs, carved runes into bone. It was the season of rest, forced upon them by the earth itself. Eirik used to think that the gods designed it so, that humans were not meant to rush endlessly from task to task, that even the land needed to breathe, to recover. When everything outside lay still, they too learned stillness. Sleep came easily in winter. The darkness itself seemed to invite it. The fire dimmed, the air cooled, and soon the hall filled with slow breathing. Even the animals sank into a kind of trance, the dog curled tight, the hens silent on their perches. Outside, snow fell in soundless drifts, smoothing the world into perfect quiet. Some nights, when the moon shone through the smoke hole, Eirik would wake and watch it, that pale disk glowing faintly above the beams. It reminded him of a shield, or of the eye of some great being watching from above. The moonlight caught on Astrid's hair as she slept, on the iron of his blade beside the bed, on the soft wool of the blankets. Everything looked still and eternal. He thought of the old stories again. His grandmother used to say that during the longest nights, when the sun disappeared for weeks, the spirits of the dead walked among the living. They meant no harm, they simply wandered, curious, remembering what warmth felt like. That was why one always kept the fire alive, so the dead could warm their hands before returning to their graves. Sometimes, when the flames flickered strangely, Eirik felt a shiver down his spine. He would glance at the far end of the hall, half expecting to see a familiar shadow. His father's maybe, tall and broad, standing quietly as he once had by the door. But there was never anything there. Only the smoke, swirling lazily toward the roof, vanishing into the night. The world outside slept deeply. Even the fjord seemed to breathe slower under its icy shell. The wind softened to a whisper. The stars shone sharper and closer, as if winter had swept the sky clean. On clear nights, the northern lights would come, sudden, without sound. A green curtain rippling across the heavens, then fading, then flaring again. The children would wake to watch them, their faces glowing with wonder. Astrid would hush them, whispering that the lights were the armor of the Valkyries as they rode across the sky. Eirik never knew if she believed it or just wanted to keep the magic alive. He liked to think there was truth in it. The lights were too strange, too beautiful, to belong to simple chance. Everything in the north seemed half-worldly, half-dream. Maybe that was why their sleep felt different, not shallow or fragile, but deep and endless, like sinking into the sea. The body rested because the world rested. No carts rattling, no shouting, no distant hum of towns. Just wind and fire and snow. The kind of quiet that makes the heart slow down, that draws the mind inward until thoughts become small, round, and peaceful. Eirik would fall asleep listening to the soft rhythm of logs cracking in the hearth. The heat touched his face, the furs pressed close. Astrid's breathing was steady beside him. In that half-dreaming state, he sometimes imagined he could hear the snow falling, that faint hiss of flakes landing on the roof. It was strange, he thought, how much comfort could come from cold. The darkness outside didn't threaten him, it protected him. It kept the world small, enclosed, simple. Within the longhouse, life was complete. There was food, warmth, stories, laughter. Everything else could wait until the thaw. Sometimes he dreamt of walking through the forest under snow, alone but unafraid. The trees bowed under white weight, the air glittered with frost. His footsteps made no sound. Somewhere ahead he'd see a faint light, a cottage perhaps, or the glow of the northern sky, and he'd follow it endlessly, never reaching it, never needing to. The dream always ended that way, peaceful pursuit without arrival. He wondered, waking, if dreams like that meant anything. The old seer in the next valley would probably have said yes. She believed winter dreams were messages from the land itself, reminders of patience, warnings to stay still. And Eirik did stay still. For months, there was nowhere to go. The fjord locked in ice, the mountain passes buried. But he didn't mind. There was something pure in that stillness, something the soul needed. The longer the dark lasted, the slower time seemed to move. Sometimes he thought the sun might never return, but it always did, faint at first, like a promise whispered through frost. On the first day the ice cracked on the fjord, he would wake to a new sound, not the soft hush of snow, but a deep echoing groan, like the world waking from sleep. The light would return little by little, and so would the noise, the drip of melting ice, the creak of trees, the shouts of neighbors digging paths. But until that day, winter remained their truest rest. It was not something to endure. It was something to surrender to, the long, slow heartbeat of the north itself. The first snow always came quietly. No trumpets of the gods, no warnings from the sea, only a soft drift of white over the black roofs, a calm hush that settled on the fjord like a sigh. It was then, under that long silence, that the Vikings found the kind of rest the world has forgotten. Our village was ready for it. The last of the fish had been salted and hung in the smokehouse. The sheep had been brought into the lower barns, where the warmth of their bodies made the air thick and living. Even the longboats, stripped of their sails, slept along the shoreline beneath rough woolen covers. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. I remember that first night of deep cold, how every creak of the wood beams echoed like a heartbeat in the dark. The wind outside howled over the hills, but inside, our home glowed amber from the fire pit. Sigrid laid thick pelts on the sleeping benches, and the children curled beneath them, their cheeks pink from the heat. The scent of pine resin and ash filled the air, and above us, the rafters whispered as if speaking in their sleep. You might think winter in the north was cruel, but to the Vikings, it was the season of stillness, a time when the body healed, when minds wandered, and when dreams stretched long and deep. There was no clock to chase, no field to till, no war to fight. Life slowed until you could almost hear your own thoughts moving. We rose with the dim light that barely broke the horizon. The sun did not climb, it only lingered there, brushing the snow with a pale glow before vanishing again. And yet, in that endless twilight, the world felt strangely alive. We spent our days by the hearth, carving new handles for axes, mending wool tunics, telling stories of old raids and ancient gods. At night, when the storm winds began to sing, we slept. And that sleep was something sacred. You see, Viking homes were built to embrace darkness, not fight it. There were no windows in the sleeping rooms, only the glow of the fire fading into shadow. The walls were thick with moss and clay, keeping the cold at bay. When you lay down, wrapped in fur and straw bedding. The silence was complete, so deep you could almost believe the earth itself was cradling you. Sleep came heavy and dream-filled. I would drift between worlds, hearing the crackle of the fire as distant thunder, the whisper of my wife as a voice of a goddess. Sometimes I saw the faces of the fallen, men I had fought beside, smiling from misty fields where no winter ever came. It was said that Odin himself visited those who slept deeply enough, whispering fragments of forgotten wisdom into their dreams. And perhaps that was why Vikings seemed so alive when spring returned. Their rest was not mere idleness, it was a kind of rebirth. The long nights gave them back what the battles took. The darkness fed their spirits as surely as the sun fed their crops. When I think of those winters now, I realize that peace is not the absence of struggle, it is the rhythm between chaos and calm. We fought the sea and the sword when the world demanded it. But when snow covered the graves and the fields, we surrendered to the slowness of time. Outside, the aurora shimmered across the sky, painting silent curtains of green and blue. They said those lights were the shields of Valkyries, flashing as they rode through the heavens to carry souls to Valhalla. But to me, they looked like dreams themselves, flowing above our sleeping world, reminding us that even the fiercest warrior needs to rest. And as I lay beneath the firs, feeling the weight of the night press gently against my chest, I thought of how lucky we were, to sleep not as the weak, but as the strong who had earned their rest. The storm would rage, the sea would freeze, the wolves would howl in the distance. But inside our little hall, hearts beat slowly, breaths were steady, and time itself seemed to stand still. The North had its way of reminding you, even in the coldest night, there was warmth. And sometimes, that warmth was nothing more than the quiet rise and fall of someone's breath beside you. By the time the snows had buried the fences and the sun rose no higher than a pale ember behind the mountains, the air itself seemed to hum with something ancient. We called it Joel, the deep heart of winter, when the world of the living and the realm of spirits brushed against one another like frost upon glass. The children whispered that the gods walked among us in those nights, cloaked in snow and wind. Some said Odin rode through the skies on his 8-legged steed, his cloak trailing the northern lights. Others spoke of the Huldra, forest spirits with hair of pine needles, who lured lonely men into the woods. The line between myth and life thinned, and no one dared sleep without leaving a small bowl of porridge by the door for wandering souls. Inside our hall, the fire never died. It was forbidden, during Joel, for the hearth to go dark, lest it invite the cold spirits in. Sigrid tended it with quiet reverence, feeding it with split birch and pine resin, her face lit by the low orange glow. We would sit long into the night, the storm pressing against the walls, and tell tales that had been passed from mouth to mouth for centuries. One night, an old seer came through the storm, a woman wrapped in ragged furs, her hair streaked with frost. She was half-blind and walked with a carved staff of bone. We gave her shelter, of course. No one turned away a wanderer in midwinter. She sat by the fire without speaking for a long time, until she said softly, "Your house sleeps well. The spirits here are at peace." Then she smiled at me, her eyes glimmering in the firelight. "But beware the restless dead," she murmured. "They envy your warmth." That night, I dreamt of footsteps in the snow outside, slow dragging steps circling the hall. I woke to silence, save for the crackle of the fire and the faint sigh of the wind. In the morning, I found Prince leading to the threshold and stopping there, as if something had stood at our door and listened. We said nothing to the children. Some things in winter were better left unspoken. As the days blurred into one another, time seemed to fold in upon itself. The world outside was a stillness so deep it almost hurt. And yet in that stillness, life pulsed quietly beneath the snow, the roots sleeping, the animals hidden, the sea breathing beneath its frozen skin. The old people said that was why Vikings slept so soundly during Joel, because the land itself was dreaming. To wake often in the night was to disturb the great sleep of the earth, and so we learned to move slowly, to speak softly, to let the hours drift past like flakes of falling snow. There was comfort in the repetition of small things. The turning of the logs in the fire, the smell of smoke in the wool of our clothes, the rhythm of someone's breathing beside you in the dark. We lived by the pulse of the flame, by the slow heartbeat of winter itself. Yet even in that peace, I could feel a strange pull, as though something beneath the snow was listening. On the 12th night of Joel, when the wind fell silent and the sky glowed with pale green light, I stepped outside. The world was so still that my breath seemed too loud. The moonlight made the snow shimmer like powdered glass. And there, down by the frozen shore, I thought I saw figures moving, tall shapes cloaked and silent, walking along the line where sea met ice. I watched until they vanished into the mist. Whether they were men or spirits, I never learned. But I remember how calm I felt, standing there barefoot in the snow, as if they were not strangers but memories, ancestors walking home through the long night. When I returned inside, the fire was burning low. I lay down beside my family and closed my eyes. The warmth wrapped around me like a memory, and soon I drifted into sleep so deep it felt like sinking beneath the sea. In that dream, I heard voices whispering through the frost, telling me of spring, of the return of light, and of how every winter must end. The next morning, I woke to the faint cry of ravens over the fjord. The year was turning. There comes a moment in every northern winter when the world exhales. You feel it before you see it, the snow softening underfoot, the ice on the eaves loosening its grip, the first trickle of water whispering beneath the frozen river. It does not arrive with fanfare or warmth, only a sense that something ancient has shifted in the bones of the earth. That morning, I awoke before the others. The fire had burned down to a bed of soft embers, and the air smelled of smoke and wool. I sat up and listened. For the first time in months, there was birdsong, a thin, uncertain note carried through the cracks of the door. It was like hearing a memory you thought had been lost. I stepped outside and found the world shimmering. The snow was still deep, but a pale gold light spread across the fjord, reflecting off the mountains like a promise. The sea was waking too. The ice that had trapped it all winter began to groan and split, echoing through the valley. The sound was almost alive, a slow cracking like the voice of a god yawning after a long sleep. Sigrid joined me, her cloak drawn tight around her shoulders. "It's beginning," she said softly. We both knew what she meant. The thaw was more than a change in weather. It was a shift in spirit. The darkness that had pressed upon the village for months began to lift, revealing faces that smiled a little easier, movements that grew lighter. Fires no longer burned out of necessity, but out of habit. And with the light returned the old rituals. We built small fires by the water's edge and offered thanks to the sun, which the elders called Sol, the goddess who rode her chariot across the heavens. We raised our faces to her warmth and whispered our gratitude for surviving another long night. The air was still cold, but the light felt alive. It touched everything with a faint shimmer, as though the gods themselves were stirring beneath the surface of the world. In those days of melting snow and dripping roofs, sleep changed. It grew lighter, shorter, filled with strange, half-remembered dreams. After months of deep, heavy rest, the body began to stir again, eager for motion, for work, for life. The children were the first to feel it. They woke early, ran through the slush, shouted into the thawing air just to hear their own echoes. The men began to repair the boats. We dragged the longships down from their winter beds, scraping away the frost and tar that had sealed them through the cold months. The smell of pine pitch filled the air, and the sound of axes and hammers broke the long silence of winter. There was joy in it, a steady rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of the village returning. At night, when the tools were set aside and the sky burned with the fading colors of dusk, we gathered once more around the fire. But the stories changed. We no longer spoke of spirits wandering through snow or gods whispering in dreams. Now we told tales of the sea, of the raids and journeys to come, of distant lands and treasures glimmering beyond the horizon. Still, as I listened to the laughter and the talk of adventure, I found myself missing the quiet weight of the long nights. There had been something sacred in that stillness, something that belonged only to those who could endure it. The dark had its own kind of beauty, a slow-breathing peace that even sunlight could not replace. One evening, as twilight deepened, I walked alone to the cliffs above the fjord. The ice was almost gone, leaving patches of black water that shimmered like glass. I watched the tide moving gently against the rocks, the first true waves of the new season. And I thought of sleep, of how our bodies had followed the rhythm of the world itself. When the land slept, we slept. When it stirred, so did we. It was not a choice, but a harmony, a bond with nature so deep we did not even see it as something remarkable. The Vikings were not simply strong because they fought or sailed. They were strong because they knew when to rest, when to surrender to stillness, and when to rise again. Their strength came from listening, to the wind, the sea, the stars, and even their dreams. I closed my eyes and felt the cold wind against my face. Somewhere, a raven called, a sharp cry that echoed over the melting fields. The air carried the scent of earth for the first time in months. Beneath the snow, life was waiting, patient and unhurried. Soon, we would sail again. Soon we would trade, raid, build, and bury. But for that one moment, the world balanced perfectly between sleep and awakening, and I stood there, breathing, remembering, and silently thanking the long dark winter that had taught us to rest. Because only those who truly sleep can truly awaken. When spring truly came, it came like a song. The snow retreated into shadows, dripping from the roofs, rushing in clear streams down the mountain slopes. The fjord opened its eyes, dark and glittering, and the sound of the sea returned, a steady rhythmic breathing that the whole village seemed to fall in step with. You could feel the energy change in everyone. The long rest was over. The men rose before dawn now, and their laughter carried across the water. The women opened the shutters to let in the pale morning light. Smoke from the hearths twisted up into a blue sky streaked with gulls. For months we had lived like the bears, slow, inward, dream-bound. Now every muscle ached to move. The sleep that once held us like a cradle became lighter, as though our bodies themselves were urging us toward the open air. It was a strange feeling, to be both rested and restless. I remember the first day we brought the longship down to the shore. The air was sharp with salt and pine. Beneath the keel, the ice cracked and hissed like steam. The ship had been sleeping too, its ribs heavy with frost, its hull dark with winter tar. We sang as we pushed, voices blending with the wind, until the boat slid free and kissed the water again. The sea accepted her back with a sound like a sigh. It is difficult to describe the bond Vikings had with the ocean. It was not merely water to us. It was a living thing, a god, a mother and a grave. It could cradle you to new lands or swallow you whole. That respect shaped everything we did. We built our ships to move with the sea, not against it, just as our bodies moved with the seasons. That day, as we repaired the oars and tightened the ropes, I found myself watching the younger men. They were strong, laughing easily, their faces shining with the glow of health that only the winter's rest could give. Their eyes burned with the hunger for adventure, the same hunger that had driven me when I was their age. But there was something else too, a calmness, a patience that came only from months of quiet nights, from dreams that had smoothed the rough edges of their spirits. You could see it in the way they worked, not rushing but steady, as though they understood that every task, no matter how small, was sacred. At night we feasted again. The mead flowed, and the air was thick with smoke and song. We sang of gods and heroes, of distant lands and battles yet to come. But beneath the noise there was a gentler rhythm, the same rhythm that had carried us through the dark, the rhythm of breath, of rest, of life returning. Sigrid sat beside me, weaving a new sail by the firelight. "They'll be gone soon," she said quietly, glancing at the men. I nodded. "And so it begins again." She smiled faintly. "You'll go with them, won't you?" "I will," I said. "But only after the earth is ready." That was how it always was. We waited for the first full thaw, for the rivers to flow freely and the winds to turn. We believed that the sea had its own moods, and only when it had truly awakened could we trust it with our lives. Those last days before the voyage were filled with an almost sacred busyness. We sharpened blades, mended nets, sealed barrels of dried fish and ale. The women embroidered charms into the sails, small runes for protection, for luck, for return. The children followed us everywhere, playing among the ropes, pretending to steer the ships of their dreams. And yet, in quiet moments, I still felt the pull of sleep. Not the heavy, bone-deep slumber of winter, but something gentler, a drifting, like a tide moving through me. It was as if the long nights had left their mark, reminding me that even in the light, rest was never far away. Sometimes, as the sun set over the fjord, I would close my eyes and hear the sea whispering. The sound was like breathing, slow, patient, eternal. It reminded me that the same rhythm beat in my chest. When we sleep, I thought, we follow the sea inward. When we wake, we follow it outward again. That was the Viking way. To live as part of the world's great pulse, to rest when it rested, to rise when it stirred. No need for clocks or calendars, only the sun, the wind, and the steady thrum of one's own heart. The night before our departure, the aurora returned. It shimmered across the sky in silent waves, green and silver, like the reflection of water in heaven. The men stood in the snow, their faces lifted toward it, and for a moment no one spoke. It felt like a blessing, like the gods were opening a path through the darkness ahead. I remember Sigrid's hand finding mine. "Sleep well tonight," she whispered. "The sea will not be so kind." And so I did. That last night before the journey, I slept deeply, peacefully, my dreams filled with light, with water, with the sound of wings. Because we Vikings knew this simple truth. You cannot conquer the world without first learning how to rest within it. The morning we set sail, the air was sharp and silver, filled with the cries of gulls and the creak of thawing ropes. The world seemed new, washed clean by the long sleep of winter. The sun hung low and pale above the mountains, still shy, but strong enough to paint the fjord in bands of gold. The village stood awake behind us, smoke rising from the hearths, women and children gathered along the shore to watch us go. The ship waited like a living thing, its dragon head gleaming with frost, its hull trembling slightly as the tide pulled beneath it. We had spent weeks readying her, oiling the wood, tying the knots, sealing every seam with tar and faith. She had slept through the long cold, and now she stirred, eager as we were to meet the wide world again. I remember the feel of the oar in my hands, the smooth, familiar weight of it. We pushed off with a shout, the rhythm of the strokes echoing like a heartbeat across the water. The wind caught our sail, and suddenly, the land began to drift away behind us. There was a moment then, a silence that fell between the waves, when I realized that we were awake in a way no man in the south could ever understand. The months of darkness had sharpened our senses, emptied us of noise. Our minds were clear as ice. The sea, vast and cold, did not frighten us. It welcomed us like an old friend. We rowed until the fjord opened into the open sea. The land became a faint shadow behind us, the mountains mere ghosts on the horizon. Ahead stretched nothing but water, gray, endless, breathing. The sail filled with wind, and the ship leaned into it, gliding over the swells as though it were part of the ocean itself. That first night at sea, I did not sleep. None of us did. We sat around the small brazier on deck, the fire flickering weakly against the salt wind. The stars came out, more than I had ever seen, so bright it felt as if we were sailing through them. The sea reflected their light, and for a moment, there was no boundary between sky and water. Bjorn, the youngest of us, pointed upward and said, "Those are the souls of the fallen, aren't they? Watching the waves." I nodded, and guiding us through them. He smiled, but his eyes lingered on the horizon. For all our strength and bravery, the first days of a voyage always carried a quiet fear, the kind that hides in your chest and only shows itself when the wind dies. But that fear was part of what made us alive. In the silence between the creak of the ship and the sigh of the sea, I thought again of winter, of the firelight, of the heavy sleep that wrapped us like the earth itself. I realized that it was that long rest that allowed this moment to exist. The winter was not death, it was preparation. Every hour of stillness, every dream whispered by the gods, had built this calm within us. Without it, we would be brittle men, breaking against the first storm. Now we were tempered. By dawn, the sea had grown rough. The waves rose higher, the wind keened through the rigging. The ship groaned like a great animal. We shouted over the spray, our voices blending with the roar of the wind. The cold bit our faces, but none of us faltered. The rhythm of the oars held, the sail strained but did not tear. And beneath it all, beneath the fury and the noise, I felt a strange peace. It was the same peace that had lived in the heart of winter. The same silence that had filled our dreams beneath the snow. That was the Viking way, to find calm not in the absence of danger, but in the center of it. To carry the stillness of the long night into the chaos of the day. By evening, the storm passed as swiftly as it had come. The sky cleared, the sea flattened, and the sun returned, glowing faintly red over the horizon. We laughed then, not out of relief, but out of gratitude. The sea had tested us and found us worthy. That night, we slept on the deck, wrapped in furs, the stars burning above us. The ship rocked gently, the sound of waves against the hull a lullaby older than time. I remember drifting off, thinking how strange it was that even here, in the vast emptiness of the sea, we slept as soundly as we had in our winter hall. Perhaps it was because the same forces ruled both. The endless rhythm of the world, the pulse that ties man to nature, dream to waking, rest to motion. Sleep came quickly, and in my dreams, I saw the northern lights sweeping across the sky like wings. I heard the sea whispering old words I could not quite understand. And when I woke at dawn, there was land ahead, dark shapes rising from the mist. Our journey had begun. And somewhere in my heart, I knew. The reason Vikings slept so well was not because of comfort or peace, but because we trusted the world around us. The fire, the sea, the gods, the silence. We slept deeply because we belonged to the rhythm of all things. When the sun rose the next morning, the sea was as calm as glass. The mist still clung to the surface, veiling everything beyond a few ship lengths. But as the light strengthened, shapes began to appear. Dark cliffs, rolling hills, the faint shimmer of green along the coast. A new land. We did not know its name, nor whether it was friendly or cursed. It did not matter. The world beyond the horizon had always called to us, not just for gold or glory, but for the quiet pull of discovery itself. To the Vikings, new shores were not simply places. They were dreams made real, carved out of fog and faith. We steered the ship toward the inlet, the oars slicing cleanly through the water. The sea was shallow here, and the sand below shone pale through the waves. The smell of earth replaced the endless salt of the open ocean. When we grounded the keel, the men leapt out, boots sinking into the wet sand, laughing and shouting like boys. For a moment, the whole world seemed awake. We dragged the ship above the tide line and built a small fire from driftwood. The smoke rose straight into the morning air, unbroken by wind. It was a good sign. Bjorn knelt beside the flames and said half to himself, "Feels strange to be standing on land again." It always does, I said. The earth feels too still after so many nights with the sea beneath you. He nodded, staring into the fire. Then he asked, "Do you ever dream of the places we've never seen?" I smiled. Always. Sometimes I think that's what dreams are for, to show us the lands that wait beyond our sight. The others laughed, but it was a knowing laughter. In our world, dreams were not idle fancies. They were messages, sometimes from the gods, sometimes from the deep self that wakes only in silence. Every man aboard had dreamt during the long winter, dreams of rivers that shone like silver, of forests that whispered, of strange stars that did not move. Now, standing on this foreign shore, I wondered if this place had been one of those dreams all along. We stayed there for several days, exploring the coast. It was a quiet land, rolling meadows, streams that ran clear, and forests where the air smelled of pine and rain. No people came to meet us, though we found signs of their passage. A fishing net, a few stones arranged like an altar, footprints near the edge of a stream. At night we slept beside the fire, the ship pulled high on the sand behind us. The sound of the sea returned as a lullaby. I found that I slept better here than anywhere else, better even than in our winter hall. The air was soft, the night long, the stars strange but kind. One night, as the fire burned low, I woke and looked out over the dark water. The surface was smooth, and in it I saw the reflection of the sky, 1,000 small lights rippling with the waves. For a moment, I could not tell which world was above and which was below. Then, just at the edge of sight, I saw movement beneath the surface. Shapes, slow drifting, like shadows made of light. They moved with a rhythm too graceful to be fish, too steady to be waves. I watched them glide in silence until they faded into the deep. When I told Sigrid of it in the morning, she only smiled and said, "The sea dreams too, you know. Perhaps it was showing you its memories." Her words stayed with me. I began to think of the sea not as something we crossed, but as something that connected everything. The land we had left, the land we had found, the dreams we carried within us. Even in sleep, we floated on that same current. By the 5th day, we began to prepare to leave. We had gathered what we needed: fresh water, wood, herbs unknown to us but sweet-smelling. We carved a small rune into a flat stone and left it by the shore, an offering to whatever spirits lived there. Before we pushed off, I turned to look at the land one last time. The mist had returned, curling along the coastline like smoke. For a moment, it looked as though the land itself were falling back into dream. And perhaps it was. We pushed the ship into the tide, the oars dipping in unison, the water smooth as silk. The coastline drifted away, fading into the fog. The world behind us grew quiet, and the world ahead waited unseen. That night, I dreamt of a voice beneath the waves, calm, slow, and ancient. It said nothing in words, but I felt its meaning all the same. Those who rest deeply travel farthest. When I woke, the sea was calm, the dawn pale. The others still slept around me, their breaths soft, their faces peaceful. I looked at them and thought how rare that peace was in the lives of men who fought and bled and sailed to the edges of the earth. But we Vikings had learned something most men had not. That rest is a kind of strength, and sleep, a kind of journey. And the sea, like sleep itself, always carried those who trusted it. For many days after we left that quiet shore, the voyage was easy. The wind came from the west, steady and kind, pushing us across the open water like an unseen hand. The sea breathed softly beneath the ship, and the men moved about their work without hurry. Even the gulls followed us lazily, drifting in our wake. But peace on the sea is never a promise. It is only a pause. It began one night, so gently that none of us noticed. The wind shifted, carrying a strange scent, sharp and metallic, like stone struck by lightning. The waves grew restless, whispering against the hull. The air thickened with mist that seemed to glow faintly, as if it held light within it. Sigrid was the first to sense something was wrong. She stood near the prow, eyes narrowed toward the horizon. "The sky is too quiet," she said. Bjorn laughed. "A calm night, and you're worried? The gods have spoiled you." But I could see it too, the wrongness of the stars. They flickered strangely, as though half hidden by a veil. The moon looked swollen and dim. Even the steady rhythm of the waves began to falter, breaking into uneven sighs. By midnight, the mist had swallowed the world. The ship drifted in a silence so deep it made the ears ring. The oarsmen stopped rowing, uncertain where the shore or the sky had gone. It felt as if we were floating inside a dream that had forgotten itself. Then came the sound. A deep, distant moan, like the voice of the sea itself calling out in pain. It rose and fell slowly, echoing through the fog. The men froze, each turning toward the sound, their faces pale. "What is it?" someone whispered. Before anyone could answer, the wind struck. It came all at once, cold and fierce, tearing the mist apart. The sail cracked like thunder, the ropes screamed, and the ship heaved sideways. The sea, once still as glass, erupted into white-capped fury. The waves struck from every direction, roaring like beasts in the dark. We scrambled to lower the sail, shouting over the wind. Salt spray blinded us. Water poured over the sides, cold as knives. The ship groaned, timbers flexing, oars snapping like twigs. And through it all, that sound, the low, mournful voice beneath the storm. Sigrid clung to the mast, her hair whipping like fire in the rain. She was shouting something, but her words vanished in the wind. I crawled to her side, clutching the wood to keep from being thrown into the blackness below. She leaned close and screamed into my ear. "It's not anger, it's sorrow." I didn't understand. But she looked out into the dark waves with something like pity. The storm raged for hours, or days. It was impossible to tell. The world became nothing but movement and noise, light and shadow. Time dissolved in the chaos. At some point, Bjorn and I took turns bailing water while the others held the ropes. Our hands were raw, our voices gone. And yet, through exhaustion, something strange happened. The rhythm returned. Not in the sea, but in us. The ship began to move with the waves, rather than against them. Each roll, each crash, felt slower, almost deliberate. I could feel the breath of the storm, and beneath it, the deeper breath of the sea, the same slow, eternal pulse that had rocked us to sleep so many nights before. I realized then that even the storm had its pattern, its own kind of rest. Not peace, but balance. Not silence, but understanding. When morning finally broke, the world was still. The storm was gone as suddenly as it had come. The sky was clear, the sea calm once more, though the water still glowed faintly with green light beneath the surface. The men slept where they had fallen, too weary to move. The ship drifted slowly, its oars trailing like limp wings. Only Sigrid remained awake, sitting by the prow, watching the sea as if listening to something I could not hear. When I joined her, she said softly, "The sea remembers everything. It doesn't rage without reason. It mourns what it takes." I followed her gaze. The water was perfectly smooth, but now and then, a faint ripple would break its surface, as if something deep below had turned in its sleep. That night, as the men finally rested, I could not. I sat awake beneath the stars, which had returned to their rightful places, and thought about what we had endured. We had survived the storm not by fighting it, but by letting ourselves move within it. We had breathed with it, like one creature. And that, I thought, was the secret that had made our people such good sleepers. Not the furs, nor the hearths, nor the quiet of the long winter nights, but the understanding that rest was not the absence of struggle, It was harmony with the chaos. Somewhere in the darkness below, the sea sighed once, softly, as if agreeing. And when I finally closed my eyes, I fell asleep faster than I ever had in my life. When dawn finally widened across the horizon, the world seemed reborn. The storm had swept everything clean, sky, sea, even thought. The air was sharp and cold, and the waves moved with a slow, steady grace, as though tired from their rage. Our ship, battered but alive, drifted quietly, the oars creaking in the gentle current. The men woke one by one, stiff and salt-encrusted. Some coughed up seawater. Others just stared, hollow-eyed, as though uncertain whether they had truly survived. Bjorn groaned, stretching his shoulders. If the gods wanted to kill us, he said, they missed their chance. But Sigrid did not laugh. She was leaning over the side, watching the sea. "Look," she said. At first, I saw nothing. Just the endless expanse of blue-gray water, faint mist curling along the surface. Then something moved, a shape floating, turning slowly with the current. We thought it was driftwood. But as we drew closer, we saw it was a man. He was lying face up, eyes closed, pale as stone. His clothes were strange, not Viking, not Saxon, not anything I recognized. Woven from a dark fabric that shimmered faintly, like the belly of a fish. Around his neck hung a piece of bone carved with runes none of us had ever seen. Bjorn pulled him aboard, muttering a quick prayer. The man was alive, barely. His breath came slow and shallow. Salt crusted his hair and beard. A scar crossed his temple, faded but deep. "From another ship?" one of the men asked. "No ship could have lived through that storm," said Sigrid quietly. "Not unless it was meant to." We laid the man near the mast and covered him with a cloak. For hours he did not move. Then, as the sun rose higher, his eyes opened. They were pale, almost colorless, and when he looked at me, I felt a strange shiver, as though he were seeing not my face but the space behind it. "Where am I?" he said, his voice raw. "Among friends," I answered. "We found you adrift." He looked around, gaze resting on the sea. "Adrift," he repeated softly, as though the word carried some private meaning. "No, not adrift. Carried." The men exchanged wary looks. Sailors know better than to question the speech of those the sea gives back. He told us his name was Leif, though whether that was true, I couldn't say. His words came slowly, like a man choosing each one with care. He said he had been sailing from the far north beyond Iceland, chasing a story older than memory, a story about a place where the sea met the sky, where no man aged and no storm could find you. "The land of sleep," Sigrid murmured. "A dream told by dreamers." Leif turned to her. "Dreams are truths that haven't yet taken form," he said. "You of all people should know that." I saw her expression change, just slightly, but enough to unsettle me. She asked him no more questions. For the rest of that day, Leif sat at the prow, silent, watching the horizon. The men gave him space. There was something about him that made noise feel wrong. Even Bjorn, who could never stay quiet for long, kept his voice low. As night came, the air grew heavy again. The sky darkened not with cloud, but with a kind of dim shimmer, as though the stars themselves were hiding. Leif still watched the water, his pale eyes unblinking. I sat beside him and said, "You spoke of a place beyond storms. What did you mean?" He was quiet for a long time before answering. "When the sea forgets to move," he said finally, "there is a silence deeper than sleep. I've heard it once. Near the edge of the world. A calm so complete that even thought fades. Those who reach it do not return. Not because they die, but because they no longer need to." His words unsettled me, though I did not show it. "You think it's real?" He smiled faintly. You felt it too, haven't you? That pull beneath your dreams? The wish not for gold or land, but for rest. True rest. The kind that never ends. He looked back at the sea, and I followed his gaze. The water was unnaturally still. No wind. No sound. The ship floated as if on a mirror. Even the stars above seemed frozen. Then, just at the edge of sight, something moved. Something vast and slow, far below the surface. The water bulged slightly, then settled. Leaf closed his eyes. It's close, he whispered. The place between waking and forgetting. A chill crawled up my spine. We're not meant to go there. He looked at me then, calm, unblinking. And yet, we always are. That night, no one slept easily. Some of the men said they heard whispers beneath the hull. Others dreamed of endless blue, of drifting without end. I lay awake, listening to the creak of the ship, wondering if we had rescued Leaf, or if he had been waiting for us all along. By morning, he was gone. No splash, no sign of struggle. Just his cloak, folded neatly where he had sat. And beside it, carved into the wood, a single rune none of us recognized. A spiral, turning inward, endless. Sigrid touched it with her fingertips and whispered, he found it. The sea was calm that day, too calm. And though none of us spoke of it, we all felt the same strange drowsiness, the same soft weight behind our eyes. As if something unseen beneath the ship was breathing, and waiting. After Leaf vanished, something changed among us. Not in what we did, but in what we felt. It was like a silence had crept aboard, soft as fog, curling between us, settling into our thoughts. No one spoke of him, yet all of us kept glancing at the place where he had sat. The rune he carved still glowed faintly at night, like a coal buried beneath ash. No one touched it again, not even Sigrid. The sea around us was strange now. Too still. Too perfect. Days passed, and not a single wind stirred the sail. The waves were gone, the water lay flat as glass. Even the gulls that had followed us for so long had vanished. It felt as if the world had stopped breathing. But at night, the dreams began. The first came to Bjorn. He said he saw a coastline made of silver sand and grass that shone like moonlight. A woman was standing on the shore, calling his name, not with sound, but with memory. When he woke, he swore he could still smell the grass. The next night, 2 more men dreamed of the same place. Then 4. Then all of us. Each dream began the same. We were at sea, drifting under a sky that shimmered like dawn trapped in glass. Ahead lay an island, green glowing faintly, so beautiful it hurt to look at. There were voices there, soft and distant, like the sea humming through a conch shell. When we woke, none of us spoke for a while. Because we knew, without saying it, that we had all seen the same thing. Sigrid was the only one who did not look frightened. She sat quietly, her eyes half closed. Dreams are the language of the deep, she said. Something is calling us. Bjorn spat into the sea. It can keep calling. I'm not following a dream to my grave. But even as he said it, I could see the pull in his eyes. That quiet longing. The same feeling Leaf had described. As the days passed, we stopped trying to row. The oarsman said the water felt thick, resisting them like honey. The sun rose and set in the same place, never climbing high, never sinking low. It was as though we had left the world's rhythm behind. At night, the dreams grew stronger. They no longer came when we slept. They came when we blinked, when we closed our eyes for a breath too long. We began to see flashes, grass moving in windless air, white towers in the distance, faces smiling through mist. One night, I awoke to find Sigrid standing at the prow, her hands outstretched toward the horizon. Her hair was loose, glowing faintly in the moonlight. "What do you see?" I asked her. "Home," she whispered. "But not any home I've known." Her voice trembled, not with fear but awe. I looked out and saw nothing but darkness. Yet even there, something shimmered beneath the surface. Faint lights moving slowly, like stars drifting in water. And then, I saw land. It was only for a moment, but I swear it was there, a faint outline, like an island half hidden behind the veil of the world. The next morning, the men spoke of it too. Some had seen it, others only felt it. A tug, a certainty that something waited ahead. Bjorn said, "If it's there, we'll find it. And if it's not, at least we'll know." So we raised the sail again, though there was no wind. The ship began to move anyway, gliding forward as though drawn by an unseen current. The sea beneath us had changed color, darker, deeper, yet shining with strange patterns that rippled and shifted like breath. Sigrid called it the dream current. "The sea beneath the sea," she said softly. "It carries those who listen." We let it carry us. Time no longer had meaning. The sun stayed low, the stars wandered in unfamiliar paths. We ate little, slept often. Sleep came like a tide. We didn't choose it, it simply arrived, pulling us down into soft, endless dreaming. And the dreams became clearer. We began to hear songs, slow, wordless, beautiful beyond speech. We saw faces of those we'd lost, brothers, mothers, lovers, smiling on that distant shore. One man, Eric, said he heard his father's voice calling his name. The next morning, he was gone. His cloak folded neatly, just like leaves. Bjorn swore and struck the mast with his fist. "No more dreams," he said. "Next man who speaks of them goes overboard." But that night, even Bjorn dreamed. He didn't tell us what he saw, but when he woke, his face was wet with tears. The air grew heavier each day, thick with salt and something sweeter. The ship no longer creaked, it drifted as though floating through thought itself. And though I tried to keep count of the days, I soon lost track. All I knew was this: we were being led somewhere. Somewhere beautiful. Somewhere dangerous. Somewhere that might not be part of the waking world at all. It happened on the 23rd day since the storm, though by then we no longer trusted the count of days. The sea had lost its rhythm, the sun its order, and the stars their familiar maps. Yet that morning, when the first gray light crept across the horizon, someone shouted, "Land." We stumbled to the prow, half-dazed, blinking into the mist. And there it was. An island, low and long, wrapped in thin, silver fog. Its cliffs were dark as wet slate, but high above them gleamed the green of meadows, so bright they seemed to glow. Waterfalls hung from the cliffs like ribbons of light, falling straight into the calm sea. The air around it shimmered faintly, as though seen through glass warmed by sunlight. For a long time, none of us spoke. Bjorn finally said, "That's it. That's what we've been dreaming." Sigrid only nodded. She looked as though she'd expected it all along. We lowered the sail and let the current pull us closer. The air grew warmer, the scent of salt fading into something strange, something sweet, like blooming heather after rain. I felt my heartbeat slow, my breath deepen. It was like the island itself was whispering rest. As we drew near, the sea turned clear as crystal. We could see the bottom, smooth stone and white sand, and faint shapes moving lazily below. Not fish, something slower, softer, as if the sea itself was breathing through them. We grounded the ship on a strip of pale sand and stepped ashore. The ground felt different beneath my boots. Softer, almost humming. Grass brushed my hands, cool and alive, as if it recognized us. The air was filled with faint music, no instruments, no voices, just the rhythm of the wind through unseen reeds. Bjorn knelt, grabbed a handful of soil, and laughed. "It's real. By the gods, it's real." But Sigrid shook her head slowly. "Real," she said, "is not always what it seems." We walked inland, following a narrow path through the meadows. The island was utterly silent. No birds, no insects, no sound but the soft whisper of grass. Yet it didn't feel empty. It felt watched. Not with eyes, but with presence. Soon we came upon a pool of still water. It reflected the sky perfectly, but when I leaned over it, my reflection did not look back. Instead, I saw scenes, shifting like smoke. My home. The hall where we feasted. My wife laughing near the fire. And then, her face turning to look at me. I staggered back, heart pounding. The image rippled and vanished. Sigrid was staring into her own reflection. Her lips were moving, whispering something I couldn't hear. Bjorn grabbed her arm and pulled her away. "Enough of that. This place plays tricks." But as we walked on, I saw the others looking at the ground, their eyes glassy. Each seemed lost in some quiet vision. By midday, the sky had turned silver. There was no sun, no shadow, just a soft glow from everywhere at once. The air was thick, heavy with scent and memory. We began to feel drowsy. One by one, the men sat down in the grass, too tired to move. Sigrid sank beside me. "It's the border," she murmured, "between waking and dream, between what was and what waits." "Leaf found this place," I said. She nodded. "And now it's found us." Bjorn, lying nearby, opened one eye. "If this is the afterlife," he muttered, "it's too quiet." But even his voice was fading. The sound of the waves was far away now, as if behind a wall of time. I fought the sleep that pressed at my eyelids, but it was useless. The island seemed to breathe with us, slow, deep, patient. The grass swayed without wind. And then, as my eyes finally closed, I saw her. A woman standing at the edge of the meadow. Tall, her hair dark as water, her eyes as pale as dawn. She said nothing, only lifted her hand and pointed toward the sea. When I turned to look, the ship was gone. Only calm water remained, endless and still. I wanted to shout, to wake the others, but my voice wouldn't come. The woman smiled, and everything went dark. When I awoke, I was alone. The island was silent, the fog thicker now, the light dim. My crew was gone. No footprints in the grass, no sign of struggle. Only the faint sound of breathing, the island itself, slow and steady, like a sleeping god. I called out their names until my voice broke. Only the echo answered. Then I saw something near the pool, a shape half buried in grass. I knelt and brushed it clean. It was a shield. Bjorn's. The wood was dry, untouched by age. Beneath it lay a single carved rune. The same spiral leaf had left behind. I stared at it, and for the first time, I understood what it meant. It wasn't a symbol of the sea. It was a map of sleep, ever-turning, never-ending. The path back to where all things begin again. And as I stood there, the wind rose, whispering softly through the grass. It carried words I couldn't quite hear, but I felt them in my bones. Rest. Drift. Remember. Return. The island was not a place. It was a threshold. And it had been waiting for us all along. The mist never lifted. It hung low and heavy, curling through the grass and over the pools, softening the edges of everything. The world had become quiet, smaller, as though distance itself had fallen asleep. I walked without knowing where I was going. The island seemed to shift beneath my feet, paths curving where none had been, trees appearing like thoughts half remembered. Each step carried me deeper, not just inland, but inward, into something that felt older than the sea itself. The silence was not empty. It hummed low and steady, like breath in a great sleeping chest. Sometimes I thought I heard voices in it, soft murmurs, too far to understand. The kind of voices one hears while half awake, when the mind still lingers in a dream. I called their names again, Bjorn, Sigrid, Eric, but the mist only whispered them back. I came upon a line of standing stones. They rose from the grass like teeth of the earth, worn smooth by wind that no longer blew. Each one was carved with runes, but not the kind I knew. They were flowing, circular, spiraling in and out like waves frozen in stone. When I touched one, it was warm. A faint sound came from the ground, a heartbeat, or maybe the echo of one. I stepped back. Beyond the stones, I saw ruins, a circle of low walls half buried in moss. The shapes were ancient, far older than any Viking hall, older perhaps than men themselves. In the center lay a slab of white stone, polished and uncracked. Something shimmered above it. Not light, not shadow, something between the two. As I drew closer, it took form. A figure, tall, cloaked, face hidden in folds of light. I stopped. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its head, as though amused. The voice that came was not heard, but felt, like a memory being spoken from inside my own chest. "You came seeking rest." The air rippled around the words. "I came seeking my people," I said. "My ship, my crew." "You came seeking what they sought." The mist thickened, shapes moving within it. I saw them then, my men Bjorn, Sigrid, the others, walking slowly through the haze, eyes calm, faces serene. They did not look at me. They passed by like spirits, silent, fading as they went. "Where are they?" I demanded. "Are they dead?" The figure did not answer immediately. When it spoke again, its tone was softer. "There is no death here. Only return. The sea carried them home." Home. I repeated. This place. All who sail far enough find this shore. Some call it the edge of the world. Others call it sleep. It is both. The figure raised its hand, and the mist shifted. For a moment, the air cleared, and I saw it. The island stretched farther than I'd imagined, glowing faintly beneath the silver light. Rivers wound through the grass like threads of glass. And everywhere, were figures walking slowly, peacefully. Some I recognized, others I did not. Men from different times, different worlds, all drifting like leaves in a single tide. They came here when the sea called them, the voice said. Those who learned to rest deeply enough. Those who understood that the storm and the stillness are the same breath. I felt something heavy inside me loosen. The fear, the searching, the ache of all those lost days, it all began to fade. But part of me still fought. "I'm not ready," I said. "I'm not done with the world." The figure's form shimmered, its outline dimming. "Then wake, wanderer. But remember this. Every sleep is a voyage, and every voyage, a kind of sleep. When the tide calls again, you will know the way back." The light brightened until I could see nothing but white. The wind, Rayal wind, rose for the first time in what felt like forever, pulling the mist apart. And then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on a familiar shore. The sand was coarse, the air cold. Above me, gulls cried. The sea moved with its old rhythm, endless and alive. Our ship was there, half buried in the tide. But there was no one else. Only a single carved stone beside me, marked with a spiral rune. I sat there for a long time, staring at it as the tide washed over my boots. I didn't know how long I'd been gone, or if I'd truly gone anywhere at all. But the calm inside me was real. Deep, quiet, unshakable. The kind of calm that stays after the dream ends. When I finally rose, the sky was turning gold. The sea glowed like beaten metal, and for the first time, I understood the stillness that lived beneath its waves. The world had not changed, but I had. And as I watched the tide breathe in and out, I whispered softly, to no one and to everything, "Sleep well, brothers. I'll see you again, when the sea forgets to move." When I finally turned away from the sea, the morning had already begun to fade into gray. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and low, and the air smelled of wet earth and iron. My legs trembled as I walked. Each step felt unfamiliar, as if I'd forgotten how to move through the world of men. The village lay not far from where the ship had first set sail. I knew the path by heart, or I thought I did. But as I followed the worn track inland, I realized something strange. The land itself had changed. Trees I remembered as young saplings now towered above me, their trunks thick and gnarled. The road had shifted, winding differently between hills that seemed steeper than before. It was as though years had passed in my absence. When I reached the first cluster of huts, I stopped. Smoke rose from chimneys, but the roofs were new. The fences had been rebuilt. Children ran by, laughing, their voices carrying through the damp air. But none of their faces were familiar. I stood there, silent, like a ghost watching the living. Then a woman saw me. She froze mid-step, her basket of fish dropping to the ground. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in disbelief. She whispered a name. My name. "Thorvald," she said. Her voice trembled. "Is it really you?" I stared at her. Her face was aged, weathered by the sea wind, but I knew her, Kara, the blacksmith's daughter. She'd been a girl when I left, waving from the shore as our ship vanished into the fog. Now she was a woman grown, lines around her eyes, gray in her hair. "How long?" I asked quietly. Her lips parted, but no sound came for a moment. Then, 15 years, she said. "You were lost with the crew. The storms took you. We built stones for you by the cliffs." 15 years. The words fell heavy, as if they carried all the years I hadn't lived. She led me through the village. People stopped what they were doing to stare. Some crossed themselves, others whispered blessings. They looked at me as though I were half alive, half legend. I tried to tell them what had happened, the storm, the island, the mist that never lifted, but as I spoke, I realized how impossible it all sounded. The words crumbled as they left my mouth, becoming nothing more than a tale told by an old sailor who had seen too much sea. But Kara listened. She always had. That night, I sat by her hearth, watching the firelight flicker on the walls. Her children slept in the next room. She poured me mead, and for the first time since returning, I felt warmth. "Did you find them?" she asked softly. "Bjorn, Sigrid, the others?" I hesitated. "In a way," I said. "They found what they were looking for." She nodded, though I could tell she didn't understand. And how could she? The next morning, I walked to the cliffs. The sea was calm, almost unnaturally so. The stones that marked our memory stood in a row, carved with runes now faded by the weather. I found my own among them, my name scratched deep into the granite, beneath the mark of a serpent. I sat beside it for a long while. The wind brushed my hair like an old friend. And in that quiet, I realized something. Ever since I'd returned, I hadn't felt truly awake. Not in the way I once had. The sounds of the village were distant, like echoes through fog. My dreams at night were vivid, so vivid that I could feel the salt spray on my face, the warmth of the sun on the misted island. And when I woke for a heartbeat, I could still hear them, voices calling softly from beyond the tide. They were not frightening. They were kind. Over the following days, I helped the villagers mend nets, carve wood, and repair boats. The work steadied me. I told no one of the way time slipped in my hands, of how sometimes the daylight seemed too thin, or how the sea hummed faintly in my bones. But I began to notice things. The nights were easier now. I no longer woke in cold sweat, no longer startled from sleep. The rest came deep and effortless, as though the very act of closing my eyes was guided by something older and wiser than myself. And others began to notice too. "Thorvald," Kara said one morning, "you sleep like the dead, yet you rise calm as dawn. What secret have you brought back from the sea?" I smiled faintly. Perhaps I left something there instead. She laughed, but her eyes searched mine for truth. I didn't tell her that sometimes when I dreamt, I saw the island again, the soft glow, the endless mist, and my shipmates walking peacefully among the stones. They looked back at me, not with sorrow, but with quiet understanding. It wasn't death they had found. It was rest. And that rest had followed me back, like the scent of salt air clinging to a sailor's cloak. In time, people came from nearby villages to ask for my stories. They said my voice soothed their sleep, that when I spoke of waves and wind, their minds grew still. Some called me a skald of dreams. Others, a man half-touched by the gods. But I was just a wanderer who had gone too far, and found what lay at the edge of waking. The sea had taken much, but it had given me something I didn't know how to name. Perhaps that's what it always gives, to those who truly listen. Not treasure, not glory, but peace.